The sun blazed overhead as the Thompsons basked in the warmth of their much-anticipated vacation. The family had saved for years to afford this luxurious getaway at the Starlight Resort, a five-star paradise nestled on the shores of a pristine beach. James Thompson, a middle-aged, hard-working engineer, leaned back on his lounger, a rare smile gracing his face as he watched his wife, Angela, laugh with their teenage children, Maya and Jordan, by the poolside. For the Thompsons, this was not just a vacation, it was a celebration of perseverance and love amidst life's many challenges. The resort exuded elegance, from its manicured gardens to its attentive staff and gourmet dining experiences. It was a space designed to welcome people from all walks of life, or so it seemed. Unbeknownst to the Thompsons, lurking amidst the splendor was a shadow of prejudice, embodied in a man wearing a badge and a scowl. Officer Gregson was not an official part of the resort's staff, but had a reputation as a freelance security consultant for high-end establishments. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a stern face perpetually set in judgment, Gregson prided himself on his supposed ability to sniff out trouble. For years, his actions had been tolerated, even praised, by those who shared his narrow worldview. To Gregson, the world was divided into those who belonged and those who didn't. The Thompsons, with their brown skin and evident joy, immediately fell into the latter category in his eyes. The first encounter was subtle, but disquieting. James had gone to the resort's boutique to pick out a surprise gift for Angela, a delicate necklace she had admired earlier. As he perused the display cases, Gregson stood nearby, pretending to browse. James noticed the officer's piercing gaze, but dismissed it as mere curiosity. "Can I help you find something, sir?" asked the boutique clerk with a warm smile. "Yes, I'd like to see that necklace," James replied, pointing to a sparkling piece in the case. As the clerk retrieved the necklace, Gregson stepped closer, his presence looming. "Nice item you're looking at there," he said, his tone carrying an edge of suspicion. James nodded politely, though he felt uneasy. "It is. My wife mentioned she liked it." Gregson's eyes narrowed, as if the simple explanation were some elaborate lie. "Your wife, huh? You sure you can afford that?" James's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I wouldn't be looking at it if I couldn't," he said, his voice calm but firm. The clerk, sensing the tension, quickly completed the transaction and handed James the neatly wrapped box. James thanked her and walked away, feeling Gregson's stare burning into his back. The real trouble began the next afternoon. The family was seated in the resort's outdoor dining area, enjoying a late lunch. Maya and Jordan were recounting their favorite parts of the morning's snorkeling adventure when Gregson appeared again, this time accompanied by another security officer. His demeanor was no longer passive, it was confrontational. "Mr. Thompson, we need to have a word," Gregson announced loudly, drawing the attention of nearby diners. James looked up, startled. "Is there a problem, officer?" Gregson crossed his arms. "We received a report of a theft from the boutique yesterday. An expensive necklace was taken, and you were seen acting suspiciously in the area." Angela gasped. "That's absurd. He bought the necklace for me. We have the receipt." James pulled the receipt from his wallet, holding it out. "Here. This proves I purchased the necklace." Gregson didn't even glance at the receipt. "Anyone can print a fake receipt these days," he sneered. "We're going to have to take you in for questioning." Angela stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "This is harassment. You can't just accuse someone without evidence." "I have all the evidence I need," Gregson shot back, his tone icy. "Now, are you going to come quietly, or do I need to escalate this?" The scene escalated rapidly. Jordan, furious, stepped between Gregson and his father. "You can't just do this. He didn't do anything wrong." "Step aside, kid," Gregson barked. "Don't make this worse for him, or for you." Tears streamed down Maya's face as she clung to Angela, who was desperately trying to reason with the other security officer, a younger man who seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. "I'm not resisting," James said, raising his hands in a gesture of compliance. "But this is wrong, and you know it." Gregson grabbed James's arm, pulling him roughly to his feet. Angela screamed, and Jordan shouted, but Gregson's grip was unrelenting. Guests watched, some murmuring in disapproval, but none stepping in to help. As James was led away, the family's world seemed to shatter. Angela's pleas echoed in the air, mingling with her children's cries. All the while, Gregson's expression remained cold, devoid of empathy, as though he had accomplished something noble by asserting his prejudiced authority. The Starlight Resort, once a haven of dreams, had become a nightmare for the Thompsons. The arrest wasn't just an affront to James, it was an assault on their dignity, their humanity, and the belief that justice and equality were universal truths. The cell door clanged shut with a metallic echo, leaving James Thompson alone in the dimly lit holding cell. The stench of stale air and the faint hum of fluorescent lights did little to faze him. He sat down on the cold metal bench, his face unreadable, his mind working faster than ever. This was not his first brush with injustice, but it was the first time he found himself on the receiving end of a system he had dedicated his life to challenging. The man behind the badge. To understand James Thompson's calm in the face of such adversity, one had to go back decades, to the life he had built before this vacation. Born and raised in a tight-knit community in Atlanta, Georgia, James had grown up witnessing both the best and worst of humanity. His father, a civil rights attorney, and his mother, a history professor, had instilled in him a sense of justice and a hunger for knowledge. Dinner table conversations often revolved around stories of courage and resilience, tales of triumph over adversity, and the importance of standing up against systemic oppression. James excelled academically, earning a full scholarship to a prestigious university where he majored in criminal justice and political science. His ultimate goal was clear: to bring about meaningful change from within the system. He joined the FBI in his early 20s, quickly rising through the ranks due to his intellect, determination, and an uncanny ability to connect the dots others missed. By the time he was in his 40s, James was a senior FBI agent with an impressive track record. He had led investigations into high-profile cases, ranging from white-collar crime to human trafficking. However, his true passion lay in rooting out corruption and systemic racism within law enforcement. James had seen it all: officers planting evidence, falsifying reports, and using excessive force against marginalized communities. He had uncovered entire networks of corrupt officers who operated with impunity, protected by a code of silence that ran deep. His work had earned him both respect and enemies. Many saw him as a hero, a man unafraid to take on the most entrenched institutions. Others viewed him as a traitor, someone who had forgotten which side he was on. The flashback: fighting the system. One of James's most significant cases had involved a ring of officers in a major metropolitan police department who were involved in extortion, drug trafficking, and falsifying evidence. For 3 years, James had worked undercover, gathering evidence that eventually led to the arrest and conviction of over a dozen officers, including 2 senior commanders. The case had made headlines, but it also put a target on his back. During that time, James had received countless threats, both subtle and overt. One anonymous message had stuck with him: "You can't change the system, Thompson. It'll chew you up and spit you out." But James refused to be deterred. He believed that every corrupt officer exposed, every unjust conviction overturned, was a step closer to a fairer system. Strategic thinking. As he sat in the holding cell, James's years of training and experience kicked in. He knew this situation wasn't just about him or the accusation of theft. It was a microcosm of the very issues he had spent his career fighting against: racial profiling, abuse of power, and the misuse of authority to target the innocent. When Officer Gregson had cuffed him at the resort, James hadn't reacted with anger or fear. Instead, he had assessed the situation like a chessboard, identifying the key players and predicting their moves. Gregson's demeanor, arrogant and dismissive, revealed a man accustomed to wielding unchecked power. The younger security officer's discomfort suggested he wasn't fully on board with Gregson's actions, a potential ally if the situation escalated. James had also noted the bystanders at the resort. Some had recorded the incident on their phones, a fact Gregson seemed to overlook in his fervor to assert dominance. That footage would prove invaluable later. The call for reinforcements. James had no intention of letting Gregson or the resort sweep this incident under the rug. Once alone in the cell, he began devising his plan. He had anticipated this kind of scenario for years. His career had made him acutely aware that no one, not even an FBI agent, was immune to prejudice. That's why he carried a small, discreet smartwatch capable of sending encrypted messages, a precautionary measure for situations exactly like this. He tapped a sequence on the watch, activating its communication mode. Using a prearranged signal, he sent a brief but urgent message to his closest colleagues in the bureau. Detained. False accusations. Resort incident. Need immediate assistance. Will explain further. Within moments, the message was received by Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, his longtime partner and one of the few people he trusted implicitly. Rebecca was as fierce as she was brilliant, a relentless investigator who shared James's passion for justice. She immediately understood the gravity of the situation and began mobilizing resources. Rebecca's first step was to pull James's file, which documented his history of commendations, awards, and spotless service record. She knew this would be crucial in discrediting any attempts to smear his reputation. Next, she contacted the Bureau's legal team and public relations department, preparing them for the inevitable media attention. Simultaneously, Rebecca reached out to a network of journalists and activists who had worked with James on previous cases. She understood the importance of controlling the narrative, ensuring that the truth of what happened reached the public before Gregson or the resort could spin their version. The calm before the storm. Back in the cell, James remained outwardly calm, though his mind was racing. He had no doubt Rebecca would come through, she always did. But he also knew the fight ahead would be arduous. Gregson was a symptom of a much larger problem, a culture of prejudice and impunity that thrived in the shadows. As he waited, James reflected on his family. He thought of Angela's strength, Maya's quick wit, and Jordan's fiery determination. They were his anchor, his reason for fighting. The thought of them gave him renewed resolve. This wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about making a statement. James knew that every step he took, every decision he made in the coming days, would have a ripple effect. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for every family that had been torn apart by injustice, every life derailed by the abuse of power. And he wasn't going to stop until the truth prevailed. Officer Gregson sat in his cramped office at the local precinct, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He thumbed through the sparse notes he had scribbled on James Thompson, which were little more than assumptions wrapped in bias. The arrest at the resort had gone exactly as he had planned. In his mind, James fit the narrative he had constructed, a man who didn't belong among the wealthy clientele of the Starlight Resort, a man whose presence needed no justification beyond his race. Gregson had spent years perfecting the art of deflection, of twisting facts to suit his narrative. His confidence wasn't born of merit but of a system that rarely held him accountable. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied that the arrest would be swept under the rug like so many others. Little did he know, this time, he had underestimated his opponent. Gregson doubles down. In the hours following James's arrest, Gregson began crafting his version of events. He summoned his subordinates to a hastily called meeting. "We've got a situation that needs to be handled carefully," Gregson began, his tone authoritative. The suspect, Thompson, was seen acting suspiciously in the boutique. He fits the profile of someone who might be looking to pull a scam. One of the junior officers raised an eyebrow. "Didn't the resort's management confirm that he purchased the necklace?" "There's a receipt." Gregson cut him off sharply. "Receipts can be faked. Look, we all know these types are good at covering their tracks. The boutique's inventory report hasn't been filed yet. Who's to say he didn't take something else while the clerk wasn't looking?" The room fell silent. A few officers exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared challenge Gregson openly. His reputation for retaliating against dissenters was well known within the department. "We need to make sure this doesn't blow back on us," Gregson continued. "Draft the report, and make it clear that Thompson was being uncooperative and acting erratically during the arrest. It'll reinforce our case." As the officers left the room, Gregson felt a surge of smug satisfaction. He had manipulated the system before, this time would be no different. The local police close ranks. When James was transferred from the holding cell to the local precinct for questioning, he was met with cold stares and curt commands. Despite the lack of evidence, the local police department immediately rallied behind Gregson. This wasn't surprising to James. Over the years, he had seen firsthand how law enforcement agencies closed ranks to protect their own, often at the expense of truth and justice. The police chief, a gruff man with a reputation for being tough on crime, held a press conference to address the growing media attention surrounding the arrest. Standing at the podium, he echoed Gregson's narrative. "Officer Gregson acted in accordance with standard procedures," the chief stated, his tone defensive. "Mr. Thompson's behavior raised legitimate concerns, and the investigation is ongoing. We urge the public not to jump to conclusions based on incomplete information." Angela and the kids watched the press conference from their hotel room, their anger and frustration mounting. The statement felt like a slap in the face, a deliberate attempt to discredit James and paint him as a criminal. Public scrutiny and media frenzy. As news of the arrest spread, the Thompsons found themselves thrust into the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. Social media erupted with polarized opinions. Some users expressed outrage, condemning the arrest as a blatant act of racial profiling. Others, swayed by Gregson's narrative, questioned James's character and motives. Journalists descended on the resort, eager for interviews and sound bites. Angela, determined to defend her husband, agreed to speak with a reputable news outlet. Sitting across from the reporter, she recounted the events with poise and conviction. "This isn't just about my husband," Angela said, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling within her. "This is about a system that treats people like us as guilty until proven innocent. My husband is a good man, a loving father, and, whether they want to admit it or not, a senior FBI agent who has dedicated his life to fighting injustice." Her words sent shockwaves through the media. The revelation of James's FBI credentials added a new layer to the story, one that Gregson and the local police department hadn't anticipated. The FBI team mobilizes. Meanwhile, James's FBI colleagues worked tirelessly behind the scenes to uncover the truth. Rebecca Martinez, James's trusted partner, took the lead. She started by pulling Gregson's personnel file, which revealed a troubling pattern of complaints. Over the years, Gregson had been accused of misconduct multiple times, including allegations of excessive force and racial profiling. In each case, the complaints had been dismissed without thorough investigation. Rebecca also contacted the resort's management, requesting access to surveillance footage from the boutique. The resort was initially hesitant, citing privacy concerns, but Rebecca's persistence paid off. Within hours, she had the footage in her possession. What she saw was damning. The video clearly showed James browsing the boutique, selecting the necklace, and completing the purchase. At no point did he act suspiciously or attempt to take anything without paying. The footage also captured Gregson's behavior, his unwarranted scrutiny of James, his attempts to intimidate the boutique clerk, and his unwarranted actions at the arrest. Rebecca knew this evidence was just the tip of the iceberg. She reached out to journalists who had covered James's previous work, providing them with the footage and context. At the same time, she assembled a team of FBI agents to investigate Gregson's past cases and his connections within the local department. A tipping point. The tide began to turn as the media picked up on the inconsistencies in Gregson's narrative. News outlets aired the surveillance footage, exposing the blatant falsehoods in his report. Public opinion started shifting in favor of the Thompsons, with calls for an independent investigation growing louder. Gregson, now feeling the heat, grew increasingly desperate. He held another press conference, this time doubling down on his accusations. "The footage doesn't tell the whole story," he insisted. Thompson's actions before and after the recording raise serious questions. We're confident that further investigation will vindicate our position. But his defiance only fueled the backlash. The evidence against him was mounting, and Rebecca's team was uncovering more every day. Internal emails revealed that Gregson had pressured his subordinates to falsify reports and suppress evidence in other cases, painting a picture of a man who had abused his authority for years. The battle lines are drawn. As James waited for his name to be cleared, he remained steadfast. He knew the fight wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. His family, his colleagues, and a growing wave of public support were behind him. Gregson, on the other hand, found himself increasingly isolated. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in his career, he was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. The stage was set for a battle not just for justice, but for the soul of a system that had long protected those like Gregson. And James Thompson, as always, was ready to face the challenge head-on. The courtroom was packed to capacity, a powder keg of tension as the long-anticipated hearing began. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras poised, capturing every twitch and murmur. The Thompsons sat near the front, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Angela held Maya's hand tightly, while Jordan sat rigidly, his jaw clenched. At the defense table, James appeared calm and composed, but beneath the surface, his mind was a storm of strategies and contingency plans. Across the aisle, Officer Gregson sat smugly with his legal counsel, exuding confidence. He was dressed impeccably in a crisp suit, a stark contrast to the dark cloud of allegations looming over him. To Gregson, this hearing was just another step in a game he believed he had already won. What he didn't realize was that the game was about to change in a way he could never have anticipated. The opening statements. The prosecutor, a sharp and eloquent woman named Patricia Myers, began by outlining the charges against James: suspicion of theft, obstruction, and resisting arrest. Her tone was measured, but her words carried an undercurrent of doubt, as if she knew the case was built on shaky ground. When it was the defense's turn, James's lawyer, Alan Carter, rose with quiet confidence. A seasoned litigator and longtime friend of the Thompsons, Carter knew this case wasn't just about clearing James's name, it was about exposing the systemic rot that had allowed Gregson to operate unchecked for years. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, Carter began, his voice resonating in the silent room, this case is not about theft. It is about abuse of power. It is about a man who has spent his entire career fighting for justice being wrongfully accused by someone who has repeatedly used his position to oppress others. And today, we will prove not only my client's innocence, but the guilt of the man who put him here. Gregson's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with feigned indifference. The testimony begins. The prosecution called its first witness, the boutique clerk from the resort. She testified about the day James purchased the necklace, confirming that he had acted respectfully and legally. However, under cross-examination, Carter pressed her about Gregson's behavior. Did Officer Gregson appear in the boutique that day? Carter asked. Yes, the clerk replied hesitantly. He was standing nearby, watching Mr. Thompson. Watching? Carter pressed. Did he question Mr. Thompson or accuse him of anything at the time? No, he didn't, she admitted. But he seemed suspicious. Carter nodded, letting her words hang in the air. Suspicious, you say? Suspicious of a man who did nothing but purchase a necklace for his wife. Thank you. No further questions. The prosecution's other witnesses added little substance to their case, and as they rested, Gregson's confidence seemed to waver. He was beginning to sense that his narrative was unraveling. The FBI strikes back. When the defense's turn came, the courtroom doors swung open dramatically, and in walked Rebecca Martinez and a team of FBI agents, carrying briefcases and stacks of files. The room buzzed with whispers as the agents took their seats behind the defense table. Your Honor, Carter announced, I would like to call Special Agent Rebecca Martinez to the stand. Gregson's face turned pale. For the first time, his composure cracked, and he leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously. Rebecca took the stand with the poise of someone who had spent years under the spotlight. Sworn in, she began her testimony with a declaration that sent shockwaves through the room. "James Thompson is not just an innocent man wrongfully accused," she said, her voice firm. "He is a senior FBI agent with an impeccable record. And for the past decade, he has been leading investigations into corruption and systemic racism within law enforcement." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge looked momentarily stunned. The evidence unveiled. Rebecca detailed her team's investigation into Gregson, presenting evidence that was nothing short of devastating. First, she introduced the boutique surveillance footage, which showed James calmly purchasing the necklace while Gregson loitered nearby, watching him with unwarranted suspicion. Then came the personnel records, complaints against Gregson for excessive force, racial profiling, and falsifying reports. Many of these complaints had been quietly dismissed or buried, but the FBI had unearthed them. Finally, Rebecca revealed internal emails and text messages that painted Gregson as a man emboldened by a system that rarely questioned his actions. In one particularly damning email to a colleague, Gregson had written, "These types never learn. Someone has to keep them in line." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Rebecca concluded her testimony. Gregson's actions in this case are not an anomaly. They are part of a pattern my team has worked tirelessly to expose. And today, we present this evidence to ensure that justice is served. The revelation. The defense's final move was a bombshell that no one saw coming. Carter called James to the stand, where he revealed his true role as an undercover investigator. For years, James testified, "I have worked to expose corruption within law enforcement. I've seen officers abuse their power, target innocent people, and manipulate the system to cover their tracks. Gregson is one of those officers. He didn't arrest me because of any crime. He arrested me because I didn't fit the image of who he thinks belongs at a luxury resort." James's words resonated deeply, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the arrogance Gregson had displayed throughout the hearing. The verdict and fallout. After hearing the overwhelming evidence, the judge delivered a scathing rebuke of Gregson and the local police department. "This court is appalled by the actions of Officer Gregson and the lack of oversight that allowed his behavior to go unchecked. I am ordering a full investigation into the practices of this department and its handling of complaints against its officers." Cheers erupted from the audience, and reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Gregson, now visibly shaken, was led out of the courtroom under the watchful eyes of the FBI agents. A new beginning. As the Thompsons stepped out of the courthouse, they were greeted by a crowd of supporters chanting James's name. Angela held his hand tightly, Maya and Jordan standing proudly by their sides. This wasn't just a victory for James. It was a victory for every person who had ever been wronged by a broken system. And as James looked out at the sea of faces, he knew his fight was far from over. But now, he wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. The gavel struck sharply, signaling the conclusion of a historic court decision. Officer Gregson sat hunched at the defense table, his once confident demeanor replaced by a hollow stare. His arrest had been swift following the revelations at James Thompson's hearing. Now, as federal agents escorted him out of the courthouse in handcuffs, the full weight of his actions bore down on him. The man who had operated with impunity for years, using his badge as a shield for his prejudice, was finally facing the justice he had long denied others. Gregson on trial. Gregson's trial became a media spectacle, covered by national and international outlets. His charges were numerous: false arrest, misconduct, obstruction of justice, and violations of civil rights. Prosecutors painted a damning portrait of a man who had built his career on intimidation and systemic abuse. Witness after witness testified, including former colleagues who, emboldened by the public scrutiny, revealed Gregson's long history of unethical behavior. One retired officer recalled Gregson bragging about his ability to manipulate reports to suit his narrative. Another recounted how Gregson had deliberately targeted individuals based on their race, often escalating minor infractions into arrests. It wasn't just about enforcing the law, the officer testified. For Gregson, it was about power, about reminding people who was in control. The evidence presented by James's FBI team was equally devastating. Financial records revealed that Gregson had received untraceable, consulting fees from businesses eager to keep their establishments free of anyone Gregson deemed undesirable. His communications showed a clear pattern of profiling, bolstered by messages that blatantly displayed his disdain for minorities. Gregson's defense team argued that he had acted in good faith, a claim that crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The surveillance footage, coupled with his incriminating emails, left no doubt about his intentions. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before delivering a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Federal investigation unveils systemic corruption. While Gregson's trial unfolded, the federal investigation into the local police department uncovered a web of corruption that extended far beyond one officer. Led by Rebecca Martinez and her team, the investigation revealed decades of unchecked misconduct, including falsified reports, evidence tampering, and systemic racial profiling. Officers who had spoken out against these practices were ostracized or forced out, creating a culture of silence and fear. The findings were staggering. Over 200 complaints of excessive force had been filed against the department in the past decade, the majority dismissed without proper investigation. A secret slush fund was discovered, used to pay off victims of police misconduct in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. A pattern of discriminatory practices in arrests, with minorities disproportionately targeted for minor offenses while similar actions by white individuals went ignored. The federal government responded with swift action, placing the department under a consent decree. A team of independent monitors was assigned to oversee reforms, including mandatory anti-bias training, the implementation of body cameras, and the establishment of a civilian review board. Several senior officers resigned or were terminated, and criminal charges were filed against those implicated in the corruption. A national conversation. The Thompson story struck a chord across the nation, sparking widespread outrage and a renewed call for accountability in law enforcement. Protests erupted in cities nationwide, with activists demanding comprehensive police reform. Social media became a battleground, with hashtags like #JusticeForThompsons and #ReformNow trending for weeks. James, initially reluctant to become a public figure, found himself at the center of the conversation. Invitations poured in from advocacy groups, universities, and news programs eager to hear his perspective. Despite his natural inclination for privacy, James understood the importance of using his platform to effect change. In a televised interview, James spoke candidly about his experience. "What happened to me isn't unique," he said. "I was fortunate to have resources and connections that many others don't. But for every story like mine, there are countless others where justice is never served. We need to dismantle the systems that allow this to happen and build a society where accountability isn't the exception, it's the rule." His words resonated deeply, inspiring a new wave of activism and legislative proposals aimed at addressing racial bias in law enforcement. Reflection and resilience. Back in the quiet of their home, the Thompsons tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy. The scars of the ordeal lingered, but so did their resilience. Angela resumed her work as a community organizer, using her voice to empower others. Maya and Jordan, who had seen their father's strength firsthand, became more vocal about social justice issues, participating in youth-led initiatives for change. James, meanwhile, returned to his role in the FBI with renewed determination. He met with his team to discuss the next steps in their ongoing fight against corruption. The experience had deepened his understanding of the systemic challenges ahead, but it had also strengthened his resolve. One evening, as James sat in his study, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The memory of the arrest, the humiliation, and the fight for justice played in his mind like a vivid reel. He thought of Angela's unwavering support, the courage of his children, and the countless people who had rallied behind their family. A framed photo on his desk caught his eye, a snapshot of the family at the resort, taken just hours before the arrest. Despite everything, the image brought a small smile to his face. It was a reminder of what he was fighting for, a world where families like his could exist without fear of prejudice, where justice was not a privilege but a right. A vow for the future. James addressed his team during a private meeting. "This isn't just about Gregson or one corrupt department," he said, his voice steady but firm. "It's about a culture that allows people like him to thrive. We've taken a step in the right direction, but our work is far from over. We owe it to the people who can't fight for themselves to keep pushing, to keep exposing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes those in power." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Rebecca nodded, her eyes reflecting the same determination. Together, they had made a dent in the system. Now, they were ready to take the fight further. For James Thompson, justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And as long as injustice existed, he vowed to walk that path, no matter how steep or winding it became.